Hello everyone, welcome to this Spring Security course. So this first module is going to focus upon introducing you to the Spring Security, and the reason why I want to launch this course is that I want to build an application and at the same time I'm going to secure that application. So it's more about you actually building a real life application and then securing it rather than going into a few hypothetical examples and then working on those use cases, right? So we will start with the core of the Spring Security. We will build an application and it's going to be a web application, but the core concepts of the Spring Security are going to be remain same. So as I said, right, we will start with with a simple form-based login, and we will eventually add a different feature to our applications, and it's going to be a full-blown application. And those concepts, I'm very sure you can use in any of your real-life projects. Okay, so this first module or the first lesson is more towards introducing you to the Spring Security. If you are already familiar with the Spring Security, you know what it does, what are the different core things about it. Go ahead, skip this and go to the next module of this course. Okay. All right. So on a very high level, there are two concepts of any of the security framework. For now, just ignore the servlet filters. I'm going to talk about it. But let's first talk about the two core principles based upon which any security framework works, right? So the first is your authentication and the second is your authorization process. So those are the two concepts where a security framework will determine whether I'm going to give you access or I'm going to deny you the access, right? So you might pass the authentication process and then you might fail into the authorization process, right? Let's say you failed into the authentication process itself, so you never go to the authorization process. Okay, so now the authentication is you basically prove your identity. That's the first step in order to for any of the security application. And when I'm saying prove your identity, that means you provide your credentials, and there can be multiple forms how you provide your credentials. For example, in a typical customer based web application, you have a login form, and I'm sure that you are already using it. For example, any of your online shopping experience, Amazon's, Walmart and other things, right? You fill your details and then you basically log into the system. So that's one way of filling your credentials. So there are other ways, right? For example, if you are into any of internet applications, you might be using LDAP. So you have one credentials for entire internet. You use that as a login form, and then eventually that LDAP and your security framework will talk with each other and establish your authentication, right? So there are multiple ways of, but at the end of it, the core concept is you provide your credentials and you verify it. The system verify it to make sure that hey, whatever the credential you are providing, those are the valid credentials. Now the second step of this process is authorization. So once you pass the authentication, it moves to the authorization process, right? So the authorization process works upon, basically it says, hey, you are requesting to access certain resources, and when I'm saying resources, it can be some part of your application, it can be a file, it can be some data information. So that's basically I call it as individual things and as a resource, right? So you're requesting for a resource. So the authorization determines whether you have the authority to access that resource or not. So even you proved your identity, if your authorization check failed, you won't be allowed to get into the system, right? So you might be logged in, but you won't be able to do anything where you want to whatever you want to do, right? So think of this entire process as you are a part of an organization, and let's say one of the organization part is HR, which stores information about its employees, which can be employees personal information, employees salary information and all those things. And only the HR peoples are authorized to access that information. But let's say somehow you also know what is the URL or what is the endpoint to access that, to go to that place. So you provide your credentials. So as part of the organization, you are authenticated. That means you are a valid user of that organization. But when it goes to the authorization, since you are not part of the HR organization, so you are not authorized to access those resources. That means you are not authorized to access the customer information or their salary information or a personal information. So the authorization will fail in that case, right? So these two steps works hand in hand. When it comes to the B2C application, when I'm saying a B2C application or any application where there is only a customers, one type of a customers, right? Mostly authentication and authorizations means if you pass the authentication, more likely you will be passing the authorization process, until unless you are working on two kind of workflows where you have a guest access as well as a logged in access, right? But if you go to any business to business applications, right, the authentication process will remain same, but authorization is something which comes into a picture at a larger extent. Think about business to business application where I am a marketplace, like for example in Amazon, right? And there are multiple vendors who want to sell the information on Amazon, right? Every vendor will have a certain privileges. They can only do certain things into their profile, right? Onto a certain areas. For example, if a vendor, I just want to allow them to create a product, set a price for the product, but inventory I'm going to decide how much I'm going to sell. As an Amazon, I want to control that one, right? So in that case, authentication, you proved yourself, but authorization, it depends upon what kind of a permissions you have on that platform, what things you can access, what things you don't have access, right? So authorization will determine all those things. And the last part is in this one is the servlet filters. Since in the beginning I said that I'm going to focus more onto the web application. So the entire infrastructure, Spring Security infrastructure, is based upon the servlet filters, right? So the Spring Security is nothing, it's more than that, but at the core of it, it's a set of the filters chains, and some kind of helpers which comes together to secure your application. All right. Now the question is, few people ask this question: why should I add another dependency? Because Spring Security will add a lot of dependencies to my application. I can build my own authentication authorization framework. Yes, we can do that. But the thing is, it's authentication authorization is not only those two things, right? Under the hood, it does a lot of things. For example, securing your application in terms of brute force attack or a click checking or a session fixation. There are CSRF things, right? For certain applications you might need a granular level of a control. So I was working. In fact, I am working on one of the platform where, in terms of the access privileges, we even provide access privileges onto the individual field levels, right? So that means even within let's say I have a product class, code, there is a field named code, right? So code only the product manager has access to modify or kind of change the product code. But let's say the marketing people don't have access. They can basically they can only read it. They cannot change it, right? These kind of things, if you start building those kind of a platform, probably that means you are rebuilding what is already there, tested and tried, right? So in terms of the advantages, it has a very good servlet API integrations, extensible support for authentication authorization, And when I'm saying extensible support, that means is Spring Boot's the Spring security comes with a bundles of the defaults. That means the moment you add the Spring security as your dependency, your authentication authorization process is up and running, and it's basically securing your application. And their defaults are really good. But in most of the applications, you want to add certain few more workflows, few more check and balance in your application. So it's an extensible framework, right? It won't stop you. You can add those one, and if you're already familiar with the Spring framework, it just kind of you extending it, creating a new Spring Beans, and you're good to go, right? It, as I said, right, it basically protects you against session fixations, which is really a clever way of manipulating your sessions. Clickjacking, we are going to talk about those ones. If you are onto a Spring MVC application, a lot of work is already done behind the scenes. So it has a first class support for the Spring MVC. Brute force attack, it handled it to a really good level. Then it has a really good support for CSRF things. We are going to talk about it. It's already built in. It provides you the extensibility to modify it, change it based upon your requirements, and the portability, right? It's easy to basically move your Spring security modules on your different application. Okay, there are a number of different modules when it comes to the dependencies. It's a pluggable architecture. There are few modules which are required. It doesn't matter if you are working on a Spring web application or a Spring or a different kind of a Spring application. Those, if you want to enable the Spring security, you have to add those dependencies. And there are certain other modules which are optional. For example, the core module is something which you need to have in your as your dependency if you want to use a Spring security. So it basically is the core for authorization, authentications, the other security mechanisms for even for the non-web application, right? Now, in terms of the web application, let's say you want to add the Spring security feature to your web application. Apart from the core module, you will be adding a web module, and web module is nothing but it's going to bring in certain filters into your infrastructure, and then certain mechanism like URL patterns and all those matches to make sure that you can play around with your application where you want to secure it, which are the non-secure areas, which are the secure areas. Within the secure areas, what are the different authorization assigned to those ones, right? And then the config module is it basically handles all your Spring security XML namespace. There are other modules on top of it. For example, if you want to use a O2, there is a O2 module. There is a module for LDAP security if you want to connect with LDAP. There is a integration with the SAML. So there are different modules, but as I said, it entirely depends upon what is your requirement. But in this course, we are going to build an end-to-end application, including a support for SAML, LDAP, O2. So we will keep on building our application, and we will keep on adding all the different dependencies. Okay. Now what I want to do is, what I want you to do now is go to start.spring.io, and if you want to build it in your ID, you can do that. Most of the IDs have a built-in integration with Spring Initializer, right? Fill all the details, project metadata, artifact, and it depends upon if you're using a Maven or a Gradle. It doesn't matter. Fill all the details. In the dependencies, we will start initially by two dependencies. Okay, so one is the Spring Web application. Okay, another dependency is the security one. Okay, so we are going to add the Spring security as another dependency. Okay, we will add a lot more of dependencies. For example, to build an UI, we might going to use a Thymee leaf, and that depends upon if you want to use a JSP. Go ahead, add that as a dependency, right? and then we will keep on adding the different dependencies. For now, add these two dependencies, click on generate and download and import this into your IntelliJ. Okay, so I have done this exercise already, and even I have added few more details, but this is how your let me increase the size, stop this application. Okay, I hope that this is more visible to you. Dev tool I have added it because it provides a lot of different features. If you don't know what kind of things the Spring Dev tools can do for you, I have added a link into the description. Follow that tutorial. It's really good tool during your development. Okay, so this is the first thing what I have added, Spring Boot starter security, and then I have added a Spring Boot starter web. Okay, rest of the things for now you can safely ignore it. The second thing is, if you look into your Spring Boot main application, this class don't have any kind of a specific things, right? Just a Spring Boot application annotation. So that is going to start your Spring Boot application. And for the demo purpose, I have created this controller. That's a class level request mapping, and then there is a mapping home, right? So the idea here is what we are going to do is we will start this application, and I'm going to show you a couple of logs here which going to indicate you, and I haven't done anything else. Okay, I haven't added any other annotations, just added this Spring security as one of the dependencies. I created this simple controller, no annotations, nothing related to the Spring security, and then my main Spring class. All right, so let's start our application and let's look into it. So I'm going to increase the size because I just want to show you a few things here. Alright, just to give an idea, I have switched this application and I have switched it back to the very basic one. Okay, so what you can do is, so I started this application, and the one interesting thing is, if you see, using generated security password, which says this password. So the moment we added the Spring security as a dependency, right, it automatically enabled the basic security for us. This is a very basic security. This is not a production grade security, but the point which I want to I want your attention is that you haven't done any kind of a configuration, but still the Spring security is active, and at least it's securing your application using a basic authentication. Now let's do one thing. Okay, our application got started, and I'm going to access this URL. Okay, all right, so I will say 8080, and then I'm going to remove this one. I think we have our mapping as account and then home. Okay, account and then home. So there is no special configurations what we have added, right? If you click here, you will get the sign in page, and the reason for that one is because Spring security is active, and now it's securing all the URLs for your application. If you don't do any configuration, by default all your endpoints are secured using a basic authentication. And this page, this sign in page is kind of provided by Spring security. We don't have any sign in page or a login page as of now. All right, so I hope you like this one, and stay tuned for the next tutorial. If you like it, please share and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching this.